You're watching Huff Post Live. I'm Ricky Camilleri. Female sexual predators, while not as common as their male counterparts, they do exist, and the pain and suffering they inflict on their victims is just as real. In a powerful new memoir, Camp Paradox, Barbara Graham pulls back the curtain on this often unspoken issue and recounts the memory of being molested as a teenager by her female camp counselor. She joins us in studio today to discuss her book and share her story. Barbara, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Ricky.
You say in the book that your abuse began with kindness.
Yes.
How so?
Well, I think actually it's pretty common for that to happen. I was a 14-year-old, probably pretty typically angst-ridden teenager. I was at summer camp. I was the kid who stayed up late at night with a flashlight reading. My counselor would come in, everybody else in the bunk was asleep, and she sat on the side of my bed and we started talking, and I told her secrets, things I'd never told anybody, and she made me feel as if I was really okay. I was a good person. There was nothing crazy or wrong with me. 'Cause
she earned your trust.
She earned my trust, and then a few weeks into that, she began touching me, and I was utterly shocked, but I had no language. I had never been sexual. I was not yet in high school. I was 14. So it sort of sent me spinning into a world that I didn't know, that was incredibly confusing. And I had no language for what was happening.
How old was she?
She was 28. She was an educator. I was 14.
And now, after the abuse started happening, you say you had no language. Was there language that she used to make sure that you didn't tell anybody?
There was. She said that I shouldn't tell anybody because they wouldn't understand. It was more of a societal problem than anything between us. She claimed she loved me. She wanted to spend the rest of her life with me. She wanted me to move and live with her when I graduated high school. I hadn't yet started high school. It was all some fantasy on her part, and she should have known better.
What was that like for you as a 14-year-old? How, you say you started spinning, you were reeling. How were you spinning and reeling? In what other ways did the pressure that this relationship had on you manifest itself in your behavior, your interactions with your family, other people?
I had never felt so isolated in my life. I couldn't talk about it. I didn't talk about it. So in a certain sense, there was this very peculiar intimacy with this woman, but I had never felt so isolated from my family, from my friends, from my life. So it was as if I was, a secret agent living some kind of double life.
Right, that isolation seems so true because it's probably the largest event that's taking place in your life, the most important event to you.
Absolutely.
And you can't speak to anybody
about
it.
And again, this was 1962 when this happened. Sexual abuse was not part of the conversation. It was not part of the public discourse at all.
Especially sex abuse between women. That
that's
even
still
another taboo.
Right,
yeah.
And in a way, the last taboo.
So what motivated you to share your story now? How did you come to want to share your story?
Well, for one thing, I'm a writer, so the way I make sense of life is through my writing. And it was in about 30 years after this happened that I was writing a magazine article about sexual abuse, and I had always framed my relationship with a counselor as kind of a weird, odd relationship, but relationship connotes consent. And as I was researching the magazine article that I was writing, I realized, wait a minute, I had been sexually abused by this woman. It completely devastated me, but it also really opened me up eventually to be able to heal from the abuse, because after that I began to talk about it and went through a whole series of stages of grief.
What were those stages?
Well, first, acknowledging, naming what really happened, which I think is key and critical. And then grief, just absolute grief and crying. And, I had been in therapy, and none of my therapists had ever named what had happened either. And then rage, and then at a certain point, and really throwing myself into those feelings.
Were you upset with yourself? Did you blame yourself? Were you angry with yourself for having taken so long to realize what had happened?
No, I wasn't angry with myself for that, but where the blame was was feeling somehow like it was my fault. And I think that's very typical, that there was something in me, there was something wrong with me, bad inside me, that caused her to choose me as her victim. So, and so letting go of that kind of self-blame was a big part of the process. That was the last part of the process. I could forgive her, in a sense, more easily than I forgave myself, but forgiving myself was really critical, because forgiveness is an inside job.
Yeah. Did you ever consider reaching out to her afterwards to confront her?
I did. I did reach out to her. Actually, I Googled her one night about 10 years ago just to see, and she popped up immediately, and she had won all these awards as an educator, and I sent her a very neutral email to which she responded, I would say, within minutes. And I was sort of stunned, and then I was living in D.C. at the time. She said she was coming down to D.C. and, you know, would I like to have a mini reunion? I write about this in Camp Paradox, and I said, sure, and I thought about it, and I thought about it, and I realized that I didn't have the power to say no to her when I was 14. I did have the power to say no to her now, and I wrote her a letter, which is also in the book, saying, naming what happened, saying, I don't know how you viewed it then, but here are the words for it. It's sexual abuse, it's molestation. Under the laws of New York State, where the camp was, it's third-degree rape. And I need you to know that. I need you to know that there was damage. I do not wish you harm, and I do not want to see you. And that was pretty much the substance of the letter. That was the last
correspondence?
And she never responded.
Would you say that your abuser wouldn't be able to connect what they did as being abuse?
I think now, at this point, she would have to. One could not have been living in this culture for the last 20 years when there's been so much news, so many headlines about boys and priests, and some about women teachers and male students. And I mean, there's just been so much in the zeitgeist. I think that's why she didn't write back to me. I think that she knew what she did. She was an educator, and she was in a position of power. But I think she absolutely couldn't deny it.
Have you talked to other people who've been abused? Have you become an advocate? Is this something that you wanted to come out and talk about? Because it is so rare that someone talks about being abused by another woman.
I believe in the healing power of telling the truth. As a writer, I'm a memoirist. This is what I do. So I write about all kinds of things, but this was a deeply formative experience for me. There's something very healing in talking about it and trying to convey to other people who have been abused to maybe perhaps impart some courage for them to tell their truth.
How long did the abuse last?
It lasted a number of months. It lasted during camp, and it lasted a few months into the fall.
Now, when you were growing up, when you weren't confronting this, because it took you 30 years to really confront this, you said, did you have trust issues with other women in your life?
I did have, well, I already had trust issues with my mother, so this woman started out as kind of a mother surrogate. I did, and I tended to get much more involved with men, though I had female friends. You know, the real damage for me, I can tell you, was confusing being seen, being known, feeling special with sexuality. And I think that's a common story in people who have been abused, is that you have the sense that you can't be loved or cared for unless you have sex with the person. And, you know, in my case, there was a confluence with the 1960s, so it was kind of like, I was really lost as to boundaries and being able to set boundaries, and had relationships with other people in positions of power, a teacher, a therapist, both men, but a similar imbalance of power until I began to get clear and was able to set boundaries.
Do you think, and this is a bit of a loaded question, I apologize if it's offensive, do you think if your perpetrator had been a man, it would have been easier for you to understand what was happening?
Yes, absolutely. I think I would have known what it was. At 14, I sort of vaguely knew about rape, but I had no knowledge of this, and I think it would have become much clearer much sooner.
What advice do you have to others?
To tell your truth, to name what happened, and to allow yourself to really experience all of the feelings associated with it. And I think there's no one clear way that people heal from any kind of sexual assault. There's no one timetable. Some people feel compelled to confront the abuser. One has to go inside, feel the feelings, name what happened, really work on forgiving oneself and understand and sort of kind of, I feel like in my case, there was a kind of soul retrieval, a kind of getting back in touch with my own goodness that got taken away, got stripped away by this woman. And it's a process. It can take years, and go at your own speed, your own timetable, and talk to people who you trust. I have certainly done that, and I've written about it. Again, that's what I do.
Well, Barbara, thank you so much for writing about it and coming on and sharing your story.